back down, not back down. Remember Tom Petty, I won't back down. We need a little of that, right? My name is Robert Scott Bell. Some of you may have heard the Robert Scott Bell Show once or twice. Anybody here ever heard the show? You, yeah, all right. You can hear it Monday through Friday on nationalnewsradio.com through, my good friend Mike Adams, the Health Ranger, and Sundays through Genesis Communications Network, which is the same network that you hear Alex Jones on from time to time. And we get a little bit of health freedom, a little liberty happening, and sometimes we'll even give you some things that are not approved by the Here and Death Administration, FDA. Be careful when you're around me. You might learn some stuff you're not supposed to know. So I'm glad to be here. My dear friend Liam Sheff will be speaking with me next. In fact, after this, we're going to dismantle the HIV causation hypothesis of AIDS, HIV test. And if you want to hear some stuff that you'll never hear in the old media, that is going to be extraordinary. So it's going to be very empowering. A couple hours, in fact, although we're going to go about 45 years, so don't panic. I'm not a tech head, and I'm not a guy that relies on PowerPoint. I like to have some visuals. In fact, I just got some information from the gals at SaneVax, if you've ever heard of SaneVax.org, I believe it is, SaneVax. And they've been covering the controversy of the HPV, Gardasil shot, and Cervix, all of the adverse events that are happening, etc. But first and foremost, you got to understand, as someone who grew up in allopathic medicine, which is modern medicine, medical monopoly medicine, pharmaceutical, doctor approved, so to speak, I had come through so many elements in my young life by the time I was 19 years of age, having gone through allergies, asthmas, surgeries, musculoskeletal inflammation, gastrointestinal diseases, infections, inflammations, severe constipation enough to be hospitalized by as a child. I had basically 10 years of allergy shots, I can go on, but the amount of abuse I had received by the medical profession was such that even though I knew I would grow up to be a doctor one day, ever since far back as I can remember when I was a little kid, I just didn't know if it would be a homeo something or other one, a homeopathic one, because I'd never heard the word homeopathy, for instance. And when I met a homeopathic doctor from Belgium 24 more years ago now, I studied with him for over 10 years and began to learn things very, very early on that would impact very positively in the rest of my life, that I could integrate in so many things in so many ways. And when I found out I could talk about it, people seemed to understand what I would say. I ended up in broadcast media and was saying things that you were not supposed to say, not allowed to say, in fact. But if you wonder why, if you ever listen to my show, why I do say what I say, maybe you don't wonder so much as that, but how I can say what I say, it's simply because I'm not selling anything. Yeah, I mean, the moment I tried to sell you something, then suddenly, whoa, hello FDA, hello FCC, FTC, whoever they want to throw at you. Because the simple act of interacting with the economy is such that they want a piece or they want all of it. And the freedom to move about the American cabin is no longer real. It's no longer available to everybody. In fact, if you want to help somebody and you want to do so by a means not approved by the federal government, you become a criminal in their eyes. And in my eyes, you become a hero. We talked just moments ago with Jonathan E. Morton and a few others in the Politics and Health panel. And we sort of ended with the fact that we need a little bit or a lot of it more courage. Now, some of you already have exhibited it. If you're here and you stood up to your doctor and said, no, you are not vaccinating my child for this human papillomavirus. But that's only one aspect of it. We need it in all areas of our life when we talk about ownership of our body. If we talk about ownership of children, at least till they're 18, when they're a majority and then they can move on if they do, we once again need to recognize who we are and what is our relationship with government, servant government. And a servant, let's say government that has unfortunately usurped its status and acknowledged, or let's say placed into a monopolistic realm, a monopoly of medicine. Monopoly medicine. Whereas they would say to you that the only way you can prevent infection or viral diseases from being caught, much less spread, is to accept this injection, whether it be for any named disease. Of course, the topic right now is for the human papillomavirus. Now, I'm here to tell you that there are 100, if not 1,000 different ways to address the human papillomavirus without ever even coming close to resorting to anything resembling what they inject into you or your child. And now they want to go after your little boys too. By the way, did that poster come up? We'll be able to show a few slides of it. Okay. the ways are so extraordinary, but I will say first and foremost that the human papillomavirus is acknowledged to be almost ubiquitous. It's, most people come into contact with it at some point in their lives. And it's not only sexually transmitted, by the way. So it's not just that. Now, does that mean, oh my gosh, then I really need one? Because even if you're not sexually promiscuous, suddenly now you're going to be victimized by it. But the reality is that virus, the HPV, just like any virus, is typically cleared by your own immune system if you have a basic level of health. And I'm not even talking often. You can be sort of okay, sort of healthy, maybe not great, but you'll clear it. And the science is clear on that, that the majority of people, and that includes little girls and women, that contract, if you will, even sexually, this human papillomavirus will clear it of their own accord with little or no symptoms. They won't even know that they've contracted it. Much like I can go into something more radical that frightens people when I talk about polio. But if you realize less than 1% of anybody that supposedly contracted polio ever got anywhere near close to something called paralysis. And you begin to wake up to see that these viruses are not as scary as we were led to believe. That there's some other forces, there's some other principles, laws in the universe that are at play here that go far beyond the FDA and the pharmaceutical industrial complex. And in fact, that our own immune system can address these things readily. And that there's another thing that needs to be disputed first and foremost. How many of you know that the human papillomavirus does not even cause cervical cancer? Are you aware of that? A few of you. I'm not saying that the rest of you were duped to believe that I was, but maybe you didn't have an opinion on it. But the fact of the matter is, as we talked in this last session, if you were in the politics and health, the government and the scientific community regularly lie to you. Outright lie to you about these things because it creates a market for them, an artificial market that you will be frightened into participating in, to buy something that you don't want or need, but they convince you that you want and need it via what? Fear. And the fear is the thing that gets us every time. Now, how are we to be not afraid? Now, in one sense, we can be big and strong like Derek over here, who does a lot of, what kind of fighting you do? MMA, jiu-jitsu. I mean, all right, he's not going to be afraid of a lot of stuff, but he might, or some people in the MMA might be really frightened of a virus, for instance, because you can be big and strong. It's like, well, it doesn't matter if you got muscles, right? Although exercise plays a huge role in your immune system and immune function. But they can frighten the toughest among us by saying that, oh my gosh, this thing is going to kill you, or debilitate you, or paralyze you, or give you cancer later in life. That big C is such a word that it has gotten us into a state of again, fear, to where the strongest of us kind of buckle and go, okay, you got me, let's just do this. And this happens so much with our children if we're not in a place of real awareness about how the immune system works, how nature works, how the world is created, what the laws are that operate in it. That we'll sacrifice our children on the altar of the church of biological mysticism. Now, some of you may be, churchgoers, or you go to synagogue, whatever you go to. Yet, outside of that one day of the week, you might be unwillingly, not knowingly, worshiping in that church. And what is that church of biological mysticism? It's modern medicine. And it's like the wizards of old, waving their wand and frightening you to believe things that aren't true through sleight of hand, through magic, through black magic. And if you only think that black magic exists in Haiti or on the African continent, no, it exists very much here in the United States, and it's called advertising. Yeah, it's a very efficient means of black magic. It's magic. And what they do, they're studied. They're very well studied in the art of propaganda, etc. And all of this leads into this place where we are, I hesitate to use the word insane enough to do the things that we do, but to some degree it's maybe only hopefully temporary insanity. That we would set aside our own ability to make rightful discrimination, right between right and wrong. That we become then victimized by this fear, and we say, okay, you can do that to my child, because I don't want the cancer. Never mind that it doesn't cause it. So we got to go back to the origin points to stop it before it becomes something that they can manipulate us with. That first and foremost, HPV does not cause cancer. You know why I know that? Well, how did they determine that it did? Anybody know that story? I'll just briefly say there's technology, and I've talked about it on my show from time to time. In fact, Liam Chef here somewhere, we talk about it on the show. It's a process or a technology called polymerase chain reaction, PCR. You've heard of PCR test? very fancy, because if somebody says, I did PCR, and it looks like you're going to die, you're like, really? No, that's very frightening. Because PCR, it's a high-tech thing, and they know. It's like the death stick in the primitive cultures. They point at you and they say, 3 days, you're done. And they believed it, and it happened. This is how modern medicine operates, by telling you, you're going to get cancer, you're going to suffer in some way, even though there's no science really to back it up. Now, how do they determine that through PCR, that the human papillomavirus causes cervical cancer, for instance? Well, they take some samples of the cells in the case of someone with a dysplasia or cancer in the uterus. And then they can't find the virus. They can't look under a microscope and go, oh, look, there's human papillomavirus all over this thing. They can't do it. They can't see any of it. There's nothing there. So they take a fragment of DNA that they find, there, and then amplify it. Not 10 times, not 100 times, not 1,000 times, not hundreds of thousands of times, but millions of times. They take that fragment, millions of times, and then they go, aha, we found it. It looks like it could be your grandfather's Buick. Oh, no, it must be the human papillomavirus. It couldn't be the Buick. But that's how radically inefficient, ineffective, including the man who developed and got the Nobel Prize for developing this, Kerry Mullis, talks about PCR. It is not capable of identifying a causative agent in disease, because if it takes taking a fragment of genetic material and amplifying it millions of times, let's say you think that you found it there, that is not evidence of causation. It can never be evidence of causation, because if you know anything about a virus, it's very fast in its replication. It steals DNA from you, or if it's an RNA virus, it steals RNA, and massively replicates so fast before your immune system gets a hold of it, you feel rotten and miserable, as they say with an influenza virus. But lo and behold, you beat it back. It was not fun, but most people beat it back, and you're on your merry way, again, hopefully shortly thereafter. But in this case, suddenly now the human papillomavirus becomes the so-called slow virus that doesn't exist. The one that just kind of hangs out forever and ever and ever and does nothing until, oh, it gave you cancer. Now, if there is viral or bacterial or other inflammatory components, you could say fungal diseases, if they're very real, that exist for many years, you could talk about damage and inflammation of tissue anywhere in the body. And if there's a lot of, let's say, viral replication, bacterial presence, chronic candida yeast infections vaginally in women, you could say there's a lot of inflammatory damage to tissue, pelvic disorders and other things that are happening, pelvic inflammation. And over time, tissue that is inflamed after years and years and years and years and years, your body might not even recognize those cells as you anymore, and you might have gone into what they call a state of autoimmunity, or autoimmune diseases like lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and different things, where your own immune system begins attacking you. Although it's not really you it's attacking, it thinks, or you might think that it's you. But the immune system knows the difference between you and not you, or self and not self. And if there's enough inflammation, enough damage to tissue that should be like this in an ideal state, just as an example visually, and now it's corrupted in some way or fashion, your immune system said, hey, that's not a bone cell, that's not, a cervical cell, and there's other issues there that create immune system attacks as well. And of course, if you're deficient in selenium, if you're deficient in so many trace minerals that you can no longer, let's say, have normal metabolic functions, normal, vital, healthy cellular reproduction, healthy cells, and you're so corrupted you can't stop these aberrant, what they call cancer cells, and by all means we do, and I will acknowledge this, all have cancer cells in our body at any time, but in a healthy body, it's just part of life. They are dealt with and done with. But in so much of our ill society, or corrupted and ill society, we've gotten to a point where we've descended to the point where we can no longer contain those so-called cancer cells. So I'm not here to say there's no such thing as cervical cancer, but I'm here to tell you that they actually lie to you about the cause of that cancer. They don't really want you to know the cause of that cancer, because you would not need anything that they are selling you. None of it. And then they say, well, we've got this new human papillomavirus injection, so to speak, Artisil initially and Cerberextent, and it covers 4 out of the 120 some odd strains, but the 4 strains are somehow more potent in causing the cancer that I've already shown you just briefly that they don't cause to begin with. And then they create all kinds of neurological havoc, side effects, vaccine adverse events. I don't know if this is on, but I do have a slide I'd like to show you. See if I can pull it up. Do we have anybody in technical that we can get this on? That would be helpful for me. Thank you. Before we get that visual up, I'll backtrack for a second, and I do this every time. I can't do a lecture without addressing this. The whole idea that the mere presence of or contact with a pathogen, whether it be a virus, bacteria, or fungus, for instance, causes disease is completely bumped to begin with. You know, as evidenced by the fact that we have right now in our throat Streptococcus bacteria. I'll hazard a guess. How many of you have a strep throat infection that's active right now? Anybody? All right. You're really upsetting Louis Pasteur right now. You know that. We all have Candida albicans in our system. No show of hands because I don't want to know how many people have a yeast infection right now. But chances are we all have Candida, but not all of us have an overgrowth of yeast, for instance. I've got to run it through this one. We can talk about even Staphylococcus aureus. They talk about methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, which, by the way, is interesting. It's more susceptible, not less susceptible to certain things in the natural world to eradicate even the resistant microbes. Thanks very much. Let me see if I can find this one slide here momentarily. There's that slide. Hi. This is me being not a tech ed. I apologize. Here's the slide. Let's see if I can bring it up. This is the adverse events that we know of already. By the way, this is from the human papillomavirus shot, the Gardasil and Cervical. I can hardly fit it on one page. But from abortion, stillbirth, and miscarriage, we go down to, Addison's disease, adrenal failure, so endocrine disruption of any and all kinds, autism-like symptoms, autoimmune diseases like lupus, where you begin to attack your own cells. Remember the autoimmunity I just mentioned? You've got convulsions, chronic fatigue, constipation, CMV, cytomegalovirus. I have actually a visual where you can see a CMV. Degenerative diseases. I mean, this is an extraordinary system. If even one of these were acknowledged to be a side effect of an herb or a supplement, even one, what would they do with that herb or supplement? Oh, it would be, they would tell you that all herbal supplements are going to end, all life on planet Earth. Sudden drops in blood pressure, tremors, vision problems. What is going on here that we would accept this kind of attack on our children? And they want to go after boys too. And I've been covering this on my radio show, and I predicted this some years ago, that they would say it would cause oral cancer as well, right? That's the argument that, okay, you boys, darn you, you don't have a cervix. How are we going to market it to you, right? Oh, you have a throat? Yeah, hey, it's in the throat. So they do the same nonsense, the same hocus-pocus game, and they say, wow, the hocus-pocus vaccine. And they say, yes, you're going to get throat cancer if you don't get the HPV shot. Now remember, I was sort of getting to the germ theory concept here. I wanted to go back to that. The mere presence of or contact with a pathogen is not enough to create disease. And it turns out that the law of the terrain is actually what we should have been looking at. This is Louis Pasteur versus Antoine Béchamp and Claude Bernard. Stuff we didn't learn in history. We have a slide for that, don't we? Yeah, and I'm going to find it again. Here we go. Which one have we got? Here we go. So, by the way, this is part of a poster that we're making available for sale for the first time ever that my dear friend Liam, who's a wonderful artist, has put together all on one page. And this is a section called Pasteur versus Béchamp. And this is where we have a religious disconnect, a spiritual disconnect, because we've worshipped at this church saying that we have to fear nature herself. Nature became our enemy because of what Pasteur stole. That we now have to fear that the virus, the bacteria, or fungus is going to kill us just by merely, I sneeze on you and I have the H3N2, the H5N1, and the whichever one you want, the R2D2 flu, whatever you want. You're all going to die, right? That's what we're told. That's the mere presence of our contact with, rather than recognizing that we are so strong and vital, if we know what to do, that those things bounce right off of us, or even if they get in us, we have the ability through a normal, healthy immune system, through a healthy gut, which I'll be talking about on Sunday, repairing the gut as a key to overcoming the vaccine and antibiotic damage, which is primarily caused in the gut, as Dr. Andrew Wakefield so aptly observed. But in this case, we have to acknowledge here the wrong-headedness of this idea that we have to fear nature, and from that moment forward, we now have the authority to conquer nature by any means necessary. Chemicals, whether they be antibiotic, whether they be pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, anything we can do to kill nature, that would help us to survive. It's not working out so well if you look at these chronic diseases. So it is the terrain or the milieu or the pathogen, not the germ, that causes disease. In other words, if you have a balanced, healthy terrain, nothing of a pathogenic nature can grow and thrive. Whereas if you upset that terrain due to nutritional deficiencies, toxin proficiencies, now suddenly you have a cesspool of an area of a breeding ground for things that couldn't grow there before. And then they're going to say, aha, the virus did it, right? But it couldn't live before. Aha, the bacteria, the fungus, but now it couldn't live. Now you have a healthy terrain and a balance that's quite different, which is what we're looking for here. Let's see the overview of the vaccine closer when it comes back up. So, law of the terrain. Now, suddenly, rather than walking through life in fear, we can walk through life empowered. Now, we have, with the HPV shot, of course, all the side effects or adverse events that are known. We also have the recognition that we have the heavy metals, the animal cells and viruses, chemical adjuvants that are absolutely destroying ourselves. We can go back to the history of vaccination. By the way, I did a 10-hour plus series of recordings with my dear friend John Rappaport, who's an investigative journalist. And I don't know if you know about this, but there's a vaccine seminar, we call it Armed and Dangerous, all the things they don't want you to hear. And it's available for download. If you go to robertscottbell.com, you can click the banner link for Vaccines Armed and Dangerous. And right now it's available for a very, very good price. It was a lot of months of, actually many years, in fact, 50 years combined knowledge between John and myself to put this together. And you will have viewpoints on vaccines as a whole, much less the HPV, which we do talk about. You'll see it from sides. Nobody, even some of our great vaccine, natural kind of experts that I love and cherish dearly, have not reported to you. And so I would encourage you to look at that. But even when we go back to smallpox and the lies that were told then, I'll go into that more later. But I mentioned the polio issue. If less than 1% of the people that supposedly contracted polio came anywhere near paralysis, how is it possible that the polio virus, if they could even isolate it, caused this so-called paralysis? So there's a lot of lies and misconceptions that have led our way. I'm not saying, oh my gosh, you guys got duped just like that. It's like been coming generationally. Our parents, their parents, and on down. That's why we are where we are today, because we've accepted the myths and the lies from 50, 60, 70 or more years ago, going back to Jenner and smallpox, which was not the smallpox, was the cowpox. You can see this written on one page. Wouldn't it be cool to show them all in one page? Really exciting. And then they told us that DDT was good for us, right? These chemicals, these synthetic toxic poisons were good for us. And we accepted it, some of us, and we ended up worse for it. And then we come to the human papilloma virus, right? And they're telling us that there's no way out. Now let me see if I can find, there was one other slide I wanted to see here. I have it, HPV reactions. Here we go. There it is. Well, I can't see it on that page. It's very hard. And, go back to the other page. I appreciate your indulgence here. I apologize. Window view. Let's do it. Show. I can see this better. There we go. You want to see the adverse events? You want to know the reason why you're here and concerned about this HPV shot? This is just in the last 5 months. Adverse events due to the human papillomavirus vaccine is Gardasil and Cervarix. In January, if you go down of this year, what is this? 24,000. December of last year, 24,000, 24,000, 23,000. Look at the increases, total increase in the past 5 months of each of those areas, from disability to death. Cervical dysplasias is evidence. In other words, the HPV shot, isn't it supposed to help you with the cervical issue, and you're causing more cervical dysplasia? More cervical cancer, it's increasing by almost 15%. Emergency room visits are up by almost 4%. Hospitalization. I mean, this is not a joke. Not that I believe any of you are taking it that way, but this kind of information is in the scientific journals. They're published, and yet our complicit government, media, and pharmaceutical groups are keeping you completely unaware of these dangers. So 2 things, maybe 3 things we got to learn. First and foremost, HPV doesn't cause cancer. It doesn't. Now, I'm not saying that you should discard or just not worry about HPV. It's a virus like anything else, but it can clear. But I'm going to share with you a way that you can clear it very quickly, and you can be sure that it's clear. If you're at all concerned, if your immune system is at all compromised. The second thing, of course, as far as relating to the cancer issue, which is real, is the reality that it's due to certain key mineral deficiencies, and chief among those mineral deficiencies is the trace mineral selenium. Cancer and selenium don't mix very well. And Jonathan Emord, the FDA dragon slayer, fought and beat the FDA 7 times already. And the FDA still will not allow the truth to be told about this humble trace element that's so necessary in microgram dosages and its ability to help you prevent and reverse cancers, many kinds of cancers. 200 micrograms a day would be your basic prophylactic maintenance, because you can't get enough even for Brazil nuts anymore. Just not enough. 200 micrograms, but I've seen and I've put people on with cancers over 1,000 micrograms a day of a food-grown state of selenium. This is not just a selenomethionine isolate or a sodium selenite isolate. This is a food state selenium. And down on the show floor next to where my booth is, through the 300 row toward the back, my dear friend Christopher Barr has a book about the selenium as well that you can read. It's a little booklet, and you can understand what I'm talking about here, how critically important this is. So the adverse effects, I wanted to talk about, maybe I could show you a slide from, let me do that. Let's see if I can show you visually. Yes. Remember I mentioned the cytomegalovirus? Let's see if I can get this up. Disorder? I've got to do it in slideshow format. This is what I do when I talk about the gastrointestinal system. Let me see if I can rush through to... There we go. Now this is a cytomegalovirus, CMV. It's in the herpes family. And it is about 200 nanometers large. I want to, nature for me, because of what I've come through, I have no lack of faith and knowledge that nature has all the solutions, answers, if you will, all the cures, so to speak. And they are not under the auspices of the FDA, whether they believe so or not. It's time to, stand up and say, no, you have no jurisdiction here. But this is a picture of a classic cytomegalovirus. It's a DNA virus, and it steals your DNA. That's how viruses work. They're not technically living bacteria or anything like that. And they'll go in and steal from you, and then they replicate. They replicate copies. They blast out thousands, millions, hundreds of millions, and this is what creates the problem. Now, your immune system knows what to do to address this, but in many cases, they're in areas where immune system is not ready to engage. So it allows for a lot of this viral proliferation until you finally address it, get it back, knock it back down. But one of the most efficient means by which we can not only help the immune system to target and stop replication of any virus, including the human papillomavirus, is to give it something it doesn't like. But when I say give it something it doesn't like, I want to give it something that your body does like, that your body will not be harmed by. Because we can find, let's say, an antiviral drug very dangerous. Just like Tamiflu for the influenza virus is very dangerous. It can create all kinds of aberrant behavioral disorders and other things that can cause you to be, if not suicidal, then delusionary in the sense that the visual hallucinations can cause you to do things that you can end up dead. But in the case of this human papillomavirus, or any virus, what can we utilize in nature to stop its replication, to denature its protein coat, but to do so in a way that will not harm any of our human cells, our liver cells, right? Because that's the problem with most antifungal, antibacterial, and antiviral drugs, is that they're very liver toxic, in addition to being toxic for the kidneys, and in addition to creating, like napalm in the gastrointestinal system, absolute, destruction of the intestinal lining. Now, those of you who have heard me lecture many years, you know where I'm going with this. There's a trace element, a mineral, a metal, if you will, that is, in my opinion, God's gift in a sense. It's that dividing line between the microbial world, the pathogenic world potentially, and the higher life functions of the mammalian cells. And it's a beautiful metal, it's a noble metal, and it's known as silver. Silver. You know, I always find the old myths very interesting because they, talk about the silver bullet that can kill the, what is it, the vampire? The werewolf? Thank you, the werewolf. Oh yeah, the werewolf, the wolf, yeah, that's the wolf disease. It's also known as lupus. And silver, of course, I would utilize in lupus, absolutely. But silver in this form that we can now produce, which is known as a bioactive silver hydrosol, has the ability, because of the size, and you can see in the top right-hand corner up here, the size of the particles in a hydrosol, which is different from just the regular colloidal silver, very small, which allows for direct interaction with the viral protein coat. The moment it connects at that level, if the silver in colloidal silver is much too large like it is in most colloidal silvers, it doesn't interact, it can't interact. We're down around 4.5 to 6.5 nanometers ideally, but below 10. Now we can stop this virus from replicating by binding to the DNA, by burrowing in the silver at that level of activity, can do that and can stop it. So we have an amazing, I would call it a medicine, that is in a pharmaceutical grade purified water that can literally, if you can bring it into contact with the virus, will stop that virus upon contact. That's what we call something being virostatic. And nothing I say disparages any herb or supplement that can also boost immunity, because even selenium can disrupt viral replication. But there is a great fear associated with any viral disease. Name the virus, that they drive that fear into you and then drive your kids or you into the needles of big pharma because of that fear. When we understand what silver can do and we have the right form, like I said, in the colloidal family, the silver hydrosol that I utilize, now you will only have to find out how to get it there, frequently enough to do the job and for the duration that you need to go to achieve the results you want. Now, in the case of a cervical human papillomavirus presence, it's not enough to drink orally, if you will, a silver hydrosol for systemic immune benefit. It's good and it's fine because the silver will oxygenate your white blood cells, your B lymphocytes, which is fantastic because they will then utilize that to produce reactive oxygen species, or ROS, to disrupt these lower life forms, including this so-called viral species, and denature their protein coats and otherwise disrupt their metabolism. But if you can deliver the silver directly to that area, you will stop that replication process right away. So if I go to what I would call a protocol, let me see if I can go to, I have it written here. Please.
What makes the silver hydrosol penetrate that capsule?
Right.
What does it want to do that?
Sure.
Does it go to every cell that doesn't take this place?
Well, the mammalian cells that we have what we call antioxidant defense mechanisms. So they are not susceptible to the damage that silver can cause these lower life forms and viral species. So they don't have a defense against what the silver brings. Now, the silver must be small enough, but it must be active enough. And I a lot of times I'll spend 30 minutes just talking about silver, but there's so much more I wanted to share. I wanted to give you that. So it sort of bypasses, Scott, your question a little bit and to go through the machinations. And I'll go through that more on Sunday if you're able to attend or get the DVD of it. But the active charge is very critical. This is very important. That if you just suck on a silver coin, that's not going to do it. If you place the silver somewhere where I can't mention, that's, a coin, that's not going to do it either. What we need to do is release the active state of silver at a scale that is overwhelming to the viral species. And in this case, we can do that with the bioactive silver hydrosol because it's releasing via an electrolytic process into a pharmaceutical-grade purified water, a form of silver that can safely be introduced into your ears, into your eyes, into your nose, into your mouth, into, what would we say as a homeopath? I can say it, into the vagina for the cervix as a douche. To then dry that silver hydrosol, which is just in a pure water, at a very low concentration, so it's non-toxic to you or any area of your body, utilizing 2, 3, or 4 ounces at a time. And of course, ladies, you're going to have to use gravity as your alibi here. If you're good at yoga, it will be even better. But by utilizing that liquid in that area and driving it into the cervix, holding it there for 15, 16, maybe even 18 to 20 minutes, ideally. But if you did that 2 times a day for a span of 2 weeks, there is no possibility that any virus, much less the human papillomavirus, exists there anymore. And of course, in the case where you already have cervical dysplasia or other issues, you go to the other aspects or properties of silver that go into downregulation of inflammation and upregulation of what we call stem cell production, the healing of tissue, which is why silver is utilized in burn care centers around the world as the primary means by which to address people that have no epithelial tissue at all because of 3rd-degree burns. Silver is the basis for their methods in modern medicine, but it's a crude form compared to this form of silver we call the silver hydrosol. Talk about the antiviral properties of being virostatic. So these are scientifically validated, scientifically known. It's not unknown, and of course there is no downside to utilizing it this way, and I always utilize it orally as well before the systemic immune benefit. Yes, ma'am, do you have a question?
Did you say 18 to 20 minutes 2 times a day for 2 weeks?
2 weeks, I mean, quite honestly, I could say you probably could do it in a week, but you have to give a generalization that says, you know, we want to go further than not far enough. Now, this isn't a concern that suddenly we're going to have resistant viral strains any more than we would have resistant bacterial strains when you use an antibiotic. That's the great news here. Even if you were to use it once and go, oh my gosh, maybe I didn't get the whole virus, it isn't that the virus is strong and suddenly can withstand the silver. That's never going to be the case. It hasn't in a billion years, or however old you think the Earth is. Silver and these things, this is what its role is and goal is, to keep that level of life in check so there is that balance. Silver can provide that. Yes, ma'am? Yeah. I have not personally, but I've talked to practitioners that have used it. I don't have a vagina to try it on, but no, seriously, that is another benefit. Yeah. Well, because of the oxygen itself is very damaging to these lower life forms. As I said, silver carries oxygen with it. I didn't mention it can carry 10 times its... Right, exactly. And silver, just by nature, you know, who created silver? It carries as much as 10 times its atomic weight in oxygen, the warmer it is. So that's why it's also an adjunct, that it's not just silver. There's many factors involved here in addressing the HPV safely and effectively in this way. So I wanted to show you that visually so you understand that there's a very powerful and strong basis here. So we have the HPV shot, as I said. There are other things that I would do, including, you know, all of the things that nutrify the body and promote for, you know, proper immune function, you know, really powerful immune function that can be assisted in this way. But the most powerful and most direct way to address the HPV, and it can cause what? Certain warts, right? We talk about genital warts. The HPV can be related to as well. And warts are typically viral, so I would utilize the silver locally and orally for systemic benefit. A teaspoon for an adult is sufficient as a dose, but I would repeat it throughout the day, 5, 6, 7 times a day while you're in the throes of any kind of outbreak, herpetic or otherwise. And that includes even the shingles and the chickenpox virus, because it's a virus just like any other, and it is susceptible to the presence of the silver in this form or in this way. Let's see, any other questions? I utilize a bioactive silver hydrosol, which is made by Natural Immunogenics. The doctors use one called Argent 23. The lay people use one called Sovereign Silver. It's in the family of colloidal silver, but what you find in colloidal silver is that you have a large degree of let's say, different qualities. You have a lot of silvers that are very large particles, very large molecules that are not efficient at addressing a viral particle that is much smaller, and you have to have it very small in order to have a proper interaction. Well, as far as a simple protocol that I would utilize would be the local use when we're dealing with HPV. And by the way, you can eradicate a yeast overgrowth in 1 day, 24 hours, by utilizing it locally. The silver hydrosol, the liquid silver hydrosol locally. Yeah, and by the way, down in the 300 aisle where I am, where my booth is, where I do my broadcasting and recording, there's silver available of hydrosol that I utilize. And you can actually get some there if you'd like, which I would recommend if you're concerned about this issue for anybody. Yes, ma'am? Yes. Well, if they're asymptomatic, yeah. I don't know that you would, because, she wants to know if you're asymptomatic, you know you've contracted HPV, would you need to do this? Well, I think for peace of mind, it would be a great idea, because you know you're not going to run into the problem of something else lying around hiding and waiting for you to become weak and susceptible. So you can utilize this program in that case, maybe even just a 3-day protocol. You're dealing with that. It's very simple locally. But asymptomatic, again, is most of the cases where your immune system is just beating it back and where it really doesn't have any impact for you. But, there are certain things that, if you utilize vaginally certain petrochemical lubricants and other things, and we'll talk about this in terms of the HIV issue later in the next segment, there are benzenes and different things that are carcinogenic as well. They never consider the synthetic chemistry, if you will, interacting in a very sensitive area of a woman's anatomy, or if I can be so bold to say rectally for those that are utilizing these things. So you have to be very careful about the toxicity of anything that goes into that area. That's why anything I would utilize would be very safe and not create more inflammation. Now, I also use homeopathy. In the last thing I did with Clinton Miller mentioned homeopathic vaccinations. That's what we call nosodes. And they are available. You really got to work hard to get them, because the FDA doesn't want you to know about them. The manufacturers of homeopathy, they have them and they use them. They might not tell you. But they're basically homeopathic forms of killed, if you will, viruses, bacteria, fungal species. So that you can use, for instance, Candida albicans in a homeopathic form to help your body identify and overcome the Candida. It's not the only thing I would use, but that would be something that would be a powerful adjunct. Similarly to the fact or the way that we can use the human papillomavirus nosode to target our immune activity, our energy centers, to focus, identify, and more successfully eradicate that. In conjunction with what we're doing here, talking about with the direct intervention of the silver hydrosol. So it's a very important thing to consider that when you look at everything, not just one thing. I'm not an isolationist homeopathy kind of guy. I've integrated everything that I felt was needed here. I want to show you some pictures because you asked, and I thought Scott was good. By the way, for detoxification, I mentioned the selenium, the chromium, which will be discussed by Christopher Barr on Sunday, also some homeopathic medicines. And one of the most powerful things you can do, and I know it sounds gross to those of you who are not familiar with it, but the use of organic coffee or even organic green tea enemas, because it facilitates the delivery of caffeine directly into the liver instead of the adrenals, and that causes the bile ducts to open up and dump the toxins and the poisons that are contributing to all of our problems. Toxicity, we're dealing with toxicology, toxicological problems. These viruses, these bacteria, these yeasts are basically opportunistic in a body that we give it the law of the terrain again. When we talk about most colloidal silvers are in fact bound molecules like silver nitrate or silver chloride. So it's not efficient. It relies upon dissociation to get its benefit, whereas the hydrosol contains only the silver and nothing else at a very microscopic level, submicroscopic, that travels around the water molecule there. That's the Mickey Mouse molecule you see, H2O. And that allows for full 360-degree interaction with your body and your body's cells where we need to get it. And it's safe. The closest to homeopathic silver, argentum metallicum, is the silver hydrosol. I don't put toxic poisons into my children any more than anybody that comes to see me. That's why I use it. I'm not saying that colloidal silver by and of itself is dangerous, but it can tend to accumulate because a lot of it looks like 5 out of 6 of these pictures under electron microscopy. 100,000 times magnification. It's an electrolytic process utilizing vortex energies. It's a proprietary process the company has developed there. that allows, if you see the 6 pictures, these are all colloidal silvers in various parts per million. But look how large a lot of these particles are. I mean, they're very inefficient. They're bound into neutral proteins and salts. And so what we want to do is look at that top right-hand corner. You'll see it's like a cloud-like dispersion indicating the energy. Now you have complete efficiency. You need very little. You don't need 100,000 parts per million, even 1,000 or 500 or 100 parts per million. Now as little as 10 parts per million can achieve extraordinary things. We've run tests in order to go to Africa, Kenya, for some tests on diarrheal diseases, where that form of hydrosol was tested against vancomycin, and it was found to be 88 times more effective than that last line defense antibiotic, vancomycin. It's a horrible drug, but yet the silver can do that and more without harming you. Yes, ma'am? There's a question of whether it cleanses your good bacteria. Under normal use that we're doing here, oral administration will not deliver transit into the gut because the microparticles are so small and active they absorb in the mucosa right here. Right? If you're utilizing other colloidal silvers, I can't promise you. If you're utilizing it vaginally, you will, cleanse the entire vaginal area like you would if you purposefully drove it into the gut. In that case, you would want a probiotic replenishment. But under normal oral use, you wouldn't have any gut interaction in that way. So it's a good question. Yes, sir?
Yeah, colloidal silver tends to cause skin discoloration.
Yeah, if you utilize complex proteins and salts, these are the compounds that create argyria over time. But, that's a known factor. In fact, if you utilize silver hydrosol in a high concentration in the wrong form, you're very quickly over the EPA reference dose. If you use 100 part per million, your first dose is already over it. Whereas if you go further to 250, where we're staying is in that green zone. We're never exceeding it, even on a power dose schedule. And the former species that I showed you is not like this that caused this guy to turn blue.
Right.
He was making that at home. And that is something you can do for only short bursts, but I wouldn't recommend to do it long term in that regard. So anyway, this is the protocol. It's so simple, it's almost like, come on, you got to be kidding me, Robert. Is that simple? Yes. Deliver the active state of silver where it needs to go. And this is true for all the viral diseases, all the things that they scare you to say, you need shots. You don't need them. My kids are unvaccinated. I've got 2 of them. They've never even once had an antibiotic. And it's not that I wouldn't say in a life-threatening situation I wouldn't consider it if something happened, but I know how to utilize these things, and I hope that you will learn to do so as well. Then we will rely upon those wizards of the Church of Biological Mysticism only in extreme, extenuating, and rare circumstances, not everywhere where it is today. Now, if you'd like to get some of these posters, Liam has them. Do we have?
I'll take one.
You want them? Yes. I don't know. Liam, tell them about the poster.
It's a hard sell. He's so nice. I was thinking for a long time, there's so much information about vaccine. What's that? Well, I could hear me before. Now I sound funny. What's the number 5 in the back for? 5-minute warning. That's not enough time to say that. Get that. Really? All right. Don't be nervous.
They're nice. Everybody's nice.
I'm very shy. So I'm not. No, I really don't. Stop. So this poster, I really big voice. Stop it. This poster.
I'm not going to stop it.
So this poster is something I've been trying to put together for a long time because there's so much information about vaccines, and you have to go to like 50 websites, right? Oh, and this says this, and this is this. So this is I was going to say 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh my God. 5 little circles from Pasteur and Deschamps in the 1700s to smallpox, which was really what? Cowpox. I mean, they didn't even get the thing right. They said that vaccination is where you take the same thing and inject yourself with it. They scraped poop from the bottom of cows and they stabbed it into people's arms. And so you see that happening here. And then you go into polio, which was pesticides and lead and all these other things in the environment. Then you come down to HPV and you get the numbers. I don't know if you had a chance to do that, but the numbers are astounding. They can even claim that this thing causes a problem based on their numbers. It's like negative 99.9% correlation. So you take 100 people, right? About 1/5 of one person, part of their shoe, might get HPV, but nobody else in the whole room. That didn't quite make sense, but tonight you'll wake up and you go, oh, I know what that guy was saying. It'll come slowly. And then some basic vaccine facts. then some websites that we like, and then a couple of books. And I don't know, it's really nice looking. I don't know who designed it, but there's some kind of artistic, what? Genius of some sort.
No, this is, we're talking about providing tools. It's not only the medicine, or if you will, or the supplements, etc. We want to provide visuals that can help you communicate what we're talking about here very readily, rapidly, and open you up to more information and access this. So it's a nice visual representation of that that you can get. Yes, we have a question here.
Can the silver be used for things like skin absorption, for joint inflammations and things like that?
So utilizing it for inflammation of the skin, or not the skin, yes, but for absorption transdermally, not so efficient. So we would have more systemic absorption. Yes, ma'am. No, this was the. Yes, well, the AB 499, I covered it on my radio show, and we talk about the fact that now you can vaccinate children up down to 12 without parental notification or consent. We're looking for repeal? Come here. Come here. For all of you from California, I do want you to know about this. And by the way, if you think Democrats are different than Republicans, that one is for big pharma and one is not, the Democrats largely were for this mandate for 12-year-olds. And I'm not bashing anybody. I'm just telling you that you got to stop looking at R&D as if they're different. Start looking at individuals and what they do. So go ahead, tell us.
My name is Ginger Taylor. I'm the mother of a vaccine-injured child, and I'm the executive director of the Canary Party. And we are starting a party to work on corruption in medicine, food issues, clean water, GMO labeling, etc. Come see us downstairs. Today we issued a press release about repealing AB 489. So right now, if you have a child, they can go into their nurse's office at school and be told, if you don't get this vaccine, you're going to get cancer. They get the shot. If they pass out in front of you, if they have seizures, if they have any of those problems, you'll never know they have the shot because it's illegal for them. It's illegal for the nurse team to tell you the child got the shot. It has to be repealed. They did this very quietly last fall, and they passed it. The woman who put it forward, very close and cozy relationship, and got lots of money from Merck. And we are working on a repeal. So if you go to canaryparty.org, check out the press release we issued today, get on board with the initiative.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
We're downstairs on 17th.
And if anybody wants to access the silver, there's more protocols down at the booth tomorrow in case I can't get down tonight, because we have a talk coming up with Liam about dismantling the HIV myth, the myth of HIV tests, including providing a legal strategy should anybody test positive to show you how it's completely false to begin with. So this is a transformative lecture coming up. I very much appreciate you coming to this one. I hope this has been helpful to you. Thank you all. Please tell everybody about the Robert Scott Bell Show, and I'll look forward to seeing you down in the booth tomorrow. I'll be there most of the day. Thank you again.
When is your show?
And next lecture is